The Oliver Anthony phenomenon is a fascinating installment in our summer of tribal entertainment, one that reveals something quite telling about the divide and how, in a way, the two sides may not be as different as they think. Let's dive in. A few months ago, Christopher Lunsford of Farmville, Virginia was living an obscure life with his family in a $750 camper. A high school dropout who suffered a cranial injury on the job, Lunsford eventually picked up a gig doing outside sales, and in the struggle to make ends meet, found himself spiraling into depression and addiction. Eventually, he reached a low point in his life and submitted himself to Christ. A month later, he took all his angst and turned it into a protest song that shook the nation, Rich Men North of Richmond.
It's a damn shame what the world's gotten to.
Next thing you know, this complete unknown rockets to #1 on the iTunes chart, generating 7-figure deal offers, invites to the biggest podcasts in the world, and mentions of his name during the GOP debate. It's a great story, the kind we secretly fantasize about in the attempt to contextualize our misfortunes. Few things are more desirable than the prospect of our pain redeeming us, that it's not just meaningless strife, but in fact, the key to new social and financial heights.
It's pure ideology.
However, this wasn't the only reason Rich Men North of Richmond went viral. With the political climate being what it is, there were other motivations that found their expression in Anthony's story. Most obviously, the shrill moral preening of those allergic to anything that resonates with the middle of the country. Rather than charitably embracing the very obvious class analysis the song invites, which, is supposed to be the left's thing, they hyper-focus on elements of the song that invoke ugly Reagan-era stereotypes like welfare queens. Others have insisted that the mention of Richmond is a dog whistle to revive the glory of the Confederate capital, despite the obvious geographical fact that Washington, D.C. is north of Richmond, and Richmond sounds like rich man. In a now depressingly common bad take from NPR, someone from the Institute for Strategic Discourse, which sounds like a pretty cush gig, claims the song stokes extremist and conspiratorial narratives. Never mind that the conspiracy about miners on an island is verifiable fact. I guess even true things must be dismissed as conspiratorial if they run parallel to unsavvy political positions, which is literally a conspiracy, but never mind. We'd easily expect Oliver to ride the outrage to the front line of the right's well-funded culture war machine. But surprisingly, he's largely resisted the temptation to grift off the divide, at least more nobly than most presented with the chance to enter such a lucrative market. He turned down an $8 million deal, and people who have struggled don't turn down $8 million. Even rich people don't turn down $8 million. He's opted instead to give free or cheap shows and focus on what he considers non-political issues like building community ties. He rejected the GOP's attempt to co-opt his song by saying the song was written about the very politicians praising him.
That song is written about the people on that stage.
And regularly claims to not represent either side. Yes, he peddled in explicitly political references, so he shouldn't expect to be immune from criticism, but there is something to be said for the courage to forsake both left and right and invite rabid criticism from all directions. Then again, when you're that famous, regulating the impact of your image so that it doesn't further the agenda of either side is basically impossible. The fact that he's appeared on the Rogan and Peterson podcasts, two extremely potent tribal identifiers, will undoubtedly limit his appeal to many on the cultural left. Nevertheless, it's at the very least encouraging to see someone resist the very powerful incentives to download tribal values wholesale and promote them for pay, at least for now. But of course, culture warriors don't take the L so easily. Despite Oliver's efforts to repel complete card-carrying membership to the right by saying things that grate their ears like diversity is our strength.
That's what makes us strong, is our diversity, and we need to learn to harness that and appreciate it.
They're still hard at work to claim him as, quote, one of us.
We accept that one of us.
To add one more to the scarce ranks of relevant conservative artists. In fact, some suggest his overnight success was orchestrated by a right-wing entrepreneur via an astroturfing campaign. The validity of this claim is outside the scope of this video, but beyond his initial blow-up, there is one particular element of Oliver that the right has focused on lately to advance their cause: his faith. In one of Ben Shapiro's recent videos, he praises Oliver for proudly promoting biblical values on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Because the Bible does carry with it a set of values. It is not just a bunch of vague standards that are unimplementable in your daily life.
And I think in doing so, he reveals something quite interesting about the right side of the culture war and how, in a weird way, they're more like the left than they think.
The Bible is still the greatest self-help book ever written.
Shapiro then says that biblical values teach self-reliance instead of blaming others, which, sure. But what I find fascinating is that he claims the ideas in the Bible ought to be followed because they are good ideas, not because they are the words of a transcendent deity, that biblical values are worth adopting because they are the values that our civilization is founded on, not because they are the dictates of our creator.
How about we actually look to, the set of values that built the civilization that we have garnered all benefit from?
Shapiro, a fellow member of the tribe, considers most any kind of religiosity to be on his side of the culture war, because to him, secular life has led to moral degradation, alienation, etc. So whether it's Christianity, Judaism, whatever, faith is essential. And again, there is merit to this, but what it isn't is pious. In fact, it's quite ideological. In his early years, Edmund Burke, considered the father of modern conservatism, penned a short piece entitled "Religion is of no efficacy considered as a state engine." In it, he makes the argument that yes, religion does carry with it benefits for believers, including the ones that Shapiro mentions. But once we think of it as just a social project promoted for rational reasons and not as something sublime, something so vast that we submit to it out of pure awe, then it loses its ability to promote these benefits. It's not that we can't talk about the perks of religion. We can. It's that can't be the way it's presented to and primarily understood by the public. Basically, religion transcends such political and rational calculations, and any attempt to contextualize it in such language will be self-defeating. Per Burke, if you attempt to make the end of religion to be its utility to human society, to make it only a sort of supplement to the law and insist principally upon this topic, as is very common to do, you then change its principle of operation, which consists on views beyond this life, and to a consideration of another kind and of an inferior kind. In his conversation with Anthony and elsewhere, Jordan Peterson makes similar rational appeals for the value of religion.
I'm constantly making arguments for a religious perspective on life, a religious orientation towards life. It's part of the reason that we need that a religious foundation isn't optional.
In the same podcast, he claims that one of society's biggest problems is that we've turned away from the sacred, profaned it, and as a result, the political becomes sacred.
The sacred has collapsed into the profane, and so the political has now become sacred. We have to have a space for things that are sacred so they stay out of the political.
Therefore, to make people less zealous about ideological issues, we should reorient towards God. But these logical pleas for religion, according to Burke, do exactly what Peterson warns about. They profane it. As Burke said in the piece, when we prescribe religion in the language of utility, we value ourselves on the discovery, we cast religion to the vulgar. In the debate between Peterson and Zizek claimed that the right's desire to return to God is a postmodern performance, no more authentic than the notion that the porn star banging twice-divorced Donald Trump is a traditional values conservative.
Conservative thinkers claim that the origin of our crisis is the loss of our reliance on some transcendent divinity or higher value. Once traditional authority loses its substantial power, it is not possible to return to it. All such returns are today a postmodern fake.
For Zizek, there is no going back. Once God has lost the ability to evoke what Burke called the sublime, a kind of ragdolling where our subjectivity is completely shocked by incomprehensible vastness, it can no longer grant us the stabilizing authority we're nostalgic for. Think of it like this. Zizek cites an example about a father and a son. The son submits to the father's authority not because the father is sufficiently competent at fatherhood. To the child, the father is imposing and grandiose. That's what gives him authority. So when Peterson and Shapiro promote a religious life in the language of its utility, they are laying bare that the emperor has no clothes, that the Sky Father has lost the ability to command that authority. Another way to consider the ideological turn of religion is to think about the concept of religion in general. In a previous video, I mentioned this book, Metamodernism by Jason Storm. In it, Jason quotes writer Wilfred Smith, who claims that religion is at its heart a secular concept. He says, to describe a given position as originating in religion is to say that it is merely perspectival, that it is merely one way of looking at the world. To call Christianity a religion is to deny its status as a universal description of the world. It is to render it thereby implicitly relative, if not false. Basically, the abstraction religion should not be available to religious people. The category religion subverts religion. My point is, if Peterson and Shapiro are building off Anthony's fame to promote religion over ideology, there may not be much of a difference. Religious orientations today are arguably more ideological than they are pious, but what do I mean by this? When conservatives speak about the value of biblical narratives, they often do so in contrast to ideology. To convey the difference, I'm just going to directly quote scholar Terry Eagleton out of his book, Ideology, because he's such a good writer. He says, ideology belongs to modernity, to the brave new epic of secular scientific rationalism, which aims to liberate men and women from their mystifications and irrationalism, their false reverence for God and monarch, and restore to them the dignity of full, rational, self-determining beings. Its ambition is nothing less than to reconstruct the mind from the ground up, dissecting the ways that we receive and combine our sense data so as to intervene in this process and deflect it to desirable political ends. This is one of the things that conservatives don't like about the Marxist tradition of critiquing ideology, a position that, on some days, I'm sympathetic to. That it meddles with sacred, often religious mysteries that have proven effective at stabilizing societies. To quote Eagleton again, because his writing is just freaking fire. To the naysayers, those who critique ideology are intoxicated with the mythology of pure reason. They set out to purge humanity of its essential mystery, converting the mind itself into a sort of material object as mechanically predictable as the circulation of blood. It is, in short, a kind of madness of reason, a hubristic campaign to blueprint our elusive spiritual being for the purposes of controlling it and manipulating it. That's not to say it's the religious who solely dislike this Marxist tradition. To quote my friend Doug Lane in a video he made about writer Ernest Becker, for Becker, grandiose myths like religion are the point of society. They distract us from our impending death. Whereas Marxism claims that these mystifications enslave us at the behest of the elite, Becker disagrees. These beautiful lies don't enslave us, they keep us sane. Because that's what the big figures of modernity did. Copernicus, Galileo, Darwin. They disenchanted the world and with it a sense of stability. On top of them, the so-called masters of suspicion further disenchanted the world, not with science, but with analysis. Think all your personal qualities are spiritually endowed and comprise a soul? Nope, Freud says our brains can be dissected like any other muscle. Think the world is a mysterious succession of events that only the divine could comprehend? Nope, Marx says you can figure it out by analyzing the contradictions in the material conditions of society. Think God guarantees a sense of meaning? Nope. Nietzsche says the Enlightenment values of science and reason have rendered God obsolete and we risk drowning in nihilism. And in a sense, Nietzsche was right, and the Ben Shapiros and Jordan Petersons of the world are acting it out through their rational appeals to reinstate religion. When we advocate for faith this way, we're promoting ideology, essentially reducing religion to benevolent show business. We're casting the writers of the Bible not as mouthpieces for an authority that transcends justification, but as storyteller kings who just really nailed it. We're claiming that our current technicians of social consciousness, to quote Eagleton again, just aren't as good as the previous ones. So while Peterson and Shapiro are using their platforms to promote Oliver's religiosity in contrast to ideology, the kind that creates the pink-haired zealots they so often criticize, in fact, the mechanisms behind them aren't so different.
The Bible is still the greatest self-help book ever written.
Now, does that mean that true faith is no longer possible? I don't necessarily think so. For example, the kind of desperation Oliver Anthony went through can make turning to Christ an experience of true submission. But the very clearly cognitively gifted Ben Shapiro has likely never been brought to faith through such an experience. I still find quite a bit of value in the metamodern approach to faith that I explored with writer Daniel Gertz in a video I made earlier this year about Peterson and the Matrix. I won't recount the whole premise here, so if you haven't seen it, check it out. As for Oliver, he strikes me as a guy who's genuinely trying as hard as he can to do good in a messy political environment, to reach not just people with the right ideas, but people who are struggling. Fame has a way of corrupting people, and almost nobody is noble enough to pick poverty over payday, so let's see how Anthony's legacy develops. Will he die a hero, or live long enough to see himself become the villain?
You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself. If you want to support the channel, check out my Ko-fi page. Link is in the description. Your contributions are very much appreciated. Check me out on Twitch, where I'm playing Bloodborne, and soon, Lies of P. Make sure to subscribe to this channel. Links are below, and as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Peace.